This is pustakverma, and you are watching pustakverma Education for All YouTube channel. And today we are going to discuss about a play from grade 11 compulsory English new course. It's Trifles. It's an one-act play by Susan Glaspell. So this figure also represents how a bird is kept inside a cage, and when the door of the cage is opened, it is otherwise freed. About the author, playwright Susan Glaspell. She was an American Pulitzer Prize winning playwright. Means she was a playwright who won the American Pulitzer Prize. Only American Pulitzer Prize जीतेकी थिइन्. She was an actress, director, novelist, biographers, and poet as well. Her works typically explores the contemporary social issue. उनको वर्कले बेसिकली के गर्छ समकालीन सामाजिक इस्युजहरू जेन्डर इथिक्स डाइसेन्ट with deep and sympathetic characters को साथमा डिल गर्छ. And her three best selling novels are Brooks Evan, Fugitive Returns, and Ambrose Holton Family. She worked as a murder trial of John Hassock. John Hassock को मर्डर ट्रायलको रूपमा उनले काम गरेकी थिइन् एज सी वाज अ जर्नलिस्ट. त्यसैको त्यसलाई बेस मानेर उनले के गरेकी छिन्. सी हेज रिटन दिस नोभेल ट्राइफल्स. She is best recognized as the pioneering feminist writer and America's first important modern female playwright. Then about the play Trifles. अब यो प्ले को बैकग्राउन्ड को कुरा गर्दा ट्राइफल्स भनेको सानो कुरा छ कुरा minor things is the Susan's play Trifles revolves around murder investigations, providing a perspective about the status of women in the contemporary American society, reflecting the male mentality as dominant gender, which she has covered as a young reporter in Des Moines. एज अ रिपोर्टरको रूपमा जर्नलिस्टको रूपमा उनले न्युज पेपरमा पनि त्यसको बारेमा कुरा व्यक्त गर्छिन् अनि यहाँ उनले कन्टेम्पोरेरी अमेरिकन सोसाइटीमा हाउ द मेल मेन्टालिटी डोमिनेट्स द फिमेल कन्सेप्ट इन द सोसाइटी त्यसलाई प्रेजेन्ट गरेकी छिन्. Trifles tells the story of two investigation, दुई किसिमको investigation into the murder of John Wright. The male characters को official investigation, female characters को their own unofficial investigation. Two sort of investigations we find in the play. The story is based on the murder of a 60-year-old John Hossack. When Susan Glaspell was a journalist in Des Moines Daily News, his wife was arrested for Hossack's farmhouse, which became the basis for her play Trifles, and later she turned this play into a short story retitling a jury of her peers. पछि यो प्लेलाई उनले के गरेकी छिन् एउटा स्टोरी फर्ममा पनि प्रेजेन्ट गरेकी छिन्. About the setting, we know very well that the setting refers to time and place. And here in this play, this trifle has been taken place in the John Wright's abandoned rural farmhouse. गाउँभन्दा टाढाको एउटा यस खेतमा जुन फार्म हाउस बनाइएको हुन्छ त्यागिएको छोडिएको अथवा एकदमै परको फार्म हाउसमा सेट गरिएको छ. ग्लोमी प्लेस भनेको एकदमै sad place down in the hollow located in Midwest in 1916 during your 1916 time period भइहाल्यो place एउटा farm house भइहाल्यो winter seasons over the roads cannot be seen due to foggy weather. Furthermore, it is set in a bleak भनेको barren untidy kitchen छ फोहोरै फोहोर छ जताततै where there is rustic dining table धुलोहरू पनि छन् chairs छ and a hand pump at the sink for water and wood burning stove for warmth and cooking. त्यो काठले बाल्नेको अथवा काठले बाल्ने स्टोभहरू छन् काठ बालेर आगो बनाउने स्टोभहरू छन् वार्मथको लागि. The room has not been cleaned up. Room सफा गरिएको छैन and it looks as if someone was interrupted in the midst of cooking a meal. खाना पकाउँदै पकाउँदै डिस्टर्ब भएको देखाउँछ. Dirty pans are stacked under the sinks and a loaf of bread is sitting outside the ब्रेड बक्स. ब्रेड राखिएको छ डर्टी प्यान देखिन्छ डोरहरू अथवा कोठाहरू पनि फोहोर देखिन्छ. थ्री डोर्स छन् one to the parlor, another to upstairs and the last one to the outside. This sitting has close connection to the theme of the play. This setting has close connection to the theme of the play. The play opens in an abandoned rural farmhouse, a gloomy place which reflect how gloomy life of a married woman is inside a house as her all sorts of freedoms are snatched from her. कसरी मान्छेको एउटा लेडिजको लाइफ एकदमै स्याड हुन्छ जब उसको सबै स्वतन्त्रताहरू खोसिन्छ, and that is also shown in this play Trifles. Then about the characters, John Wright, husband, a farm owner and an egoist man, ego body भएको. Minnie Wright, a young and pretty woman who has a loveless marriage life. उनी एक young pretty भए पनि उनको marriage life राम्रो हुँदैन. Full of depressions, also known as a caged songbird. उनलाई caged songbird, पिंजडामा बाँधिएको चरा जस्तो उनलाई भन्ने गरिन्छ. Accused of killing her husband, John Wright. मारिएको जोन राइटलाई मारेको उसमा के गरिन्छ, दोषी लगाइन्छ, उनलाई दोष लगाएर दोषी ठहराएर उनलाई पुलिसले समातेर लैजान्छ. जज हेन्डरसन, कन्ट्री अटर्नी हु प्रोसिक्युट द माइनिज फर मर्डरर्स, मिनीको मर्डरको लागि उसले के गर्छ, प्रोसिक्युट गर्छ. हेनरी पेटर्स, अ पर्सन लिडिङ टु द इन्भेस्टिगेसन्स, अर्को मिसेस प्याटर्स, हेनरी प्याटर्स वाइफ. लेविस हेल, यो पनि एउटा के हुन्छ, नाइबोरिङ फार्मर छ, प्राइड फ्यामिली. मिसेज हेल उसको लेविस हेलको वाइफ. सो दिज आर द क्यारेक्टर्स. The title Trifles refers a very small matter, सानो तुच्छ कुराहरू गर्छ, as the title reflects how the females were not given priority by the males during the time in the America in contemporary society. So the title of the, as we talks about the title Trifle, our title Trifle को कुरा गर्छौं, refers to the concerns of the women in the play, which the man considers to be only trifle. manले female खाली trifles को रूपमा तुच्छ एउटा सानो कुरा consider गर्छन्. It includes such as the things canning jars, fruits that many rights is concerned about. सानसानो कुराहरूसँग वुमेनहरू कन्सर्न हुन्छन्, ठुलो कुराहरूसँग मेल कन्सर्न हुन्छ, त्यो कुराहरूलाई रिप्रेजेन्ट गर्छ. Here, trifles represent concern of the women and the motives of the mini's crime. It also reflects the male's prejudice that women are interested only in silly, superficial things. यसले के देखाउँछ, फिमेलहरू सुपरफिसियल सिल्ली थिङ्सहरूमा बढी के हुन्छन् त, engage हुन्छन्. The title of the play Trifles is ironic because it embodies the most important answer to the questions asked in the play, answer to the mystery of John Wright's death. A trifle is something of little importance. थोरै महत्व भएको चिजलाई हामीले ट्राइफल भन्ने गर्छौं. The country attorney calls the conversation between Mrs. Hale and Mrs. Peters trifle. उसले Mrs. Hale र Mrs. Peters को कन्भर्सेसनलाई पनि ट्राइफल भन्छ. Women are just only for conversation. They don't have knowledge of getting any important significant thing in the investigation. त्यसरी उसले सम्झेको हुन्छ. र वास्तवमा के हुन्छ, but in fact they have got the real प्रुफ अफ दि मर्डर्स वास्तवमा पाएका हुन्छन्, तर तिनीहरूले फाइनली के गर्छन्, त्यो प्यारोटलाई अथवा त्यो क्यानरी बर्डलाई हाइड गरेका हुन्छन्, लुकाउँछन्. यसरी मेलले फिमेलको सिग्निफिकेन्स देखाएको छैन यो प्लेमा, हामीले त्यो पाउँछौं. ट्राइफल इन द प्ले आर द क्वाइल्ट एन्ड, अब गद्दाहरू रजाईहरूको कुरा गर्छ. द वे सी वाज पिर्सिङ इज टुगेदर, यो सियोले त्यसलाई सिलिरहेको हुन्छन्, बाई क्विल्टिङ अर नोटिङ. बट इन द प्ले अडियन्स नोज ओन्ली the women can understand the reason behind the murder. हामीले throughout the play main characters, male characters are unable to know about the things, but female characters and the audience knows that why the murder takes place and how it takes place by whom. Theme, as we talk about the theme of the play, this trifle, यो trifle play एउटा के हो त, it is a murder mystery, मर्डरको रहस्यको एउटा प्ले हो. इट क्यारिज द थिम्स अफ फिमेल आइडेन्टिटी. बेसिकली यसले के गर्छ, फिमेल आइडेन्टिटी, जेन्डर रिलेसनसिप, पावर बिट्विन सेक्सेस, नेचर अफ ट्रुथ. इट अल्सो मुभ्स अराउन्ड द आइसोलेसन, सफरिङ, रिभेन्ज, भाइलेन्स, जस्टिस, मेल डोमिनेसन एन्ड फेमिनिजम. सो मेनी थिङ्स, बट आई हेभ इन्क्लुडेड हियर ओन्ली द फिमेल आइडेन्टिटी. When speaking to the female characters in the trifle, Hendersons and other men make a key mistakes in their assumptions that women derive their identity solely from their relationship to men. तिनीहरूले के सोचेका हुन्छन्, women को identity male सँग associate गरिएको छ. Women do not have separate identity. For example, Henderson tells Mrs. Peters that because she is married to sheriff, sheriffसँग म्यारिड गरिएको छ, सी इज म्यारिड टु दि ल, कानुनसँग म्यारिड गरे, एन्ड देयरफोर अ रिलायबल फलोवर अफ ल. मिसेस पेटर्स रिस्पोन्स इज नो, जस्ट that way. As Mrs. Hale conclude, women all go through the same thing. It is all just a different kind of same thing. Mrs. Hale, mini rights models of husbands is the ultimate rejections of her husband's imposed an identity. The male characters only wants to gather evidence of Minnie's crime, whereas the women come to understand the emotional pain and the drove the Minnie to murder her husband, which reflects the female seeking their identity. यो मेलले प्रुफ मात्र खोजिरहेको हुन्छन्, फिमेलले वास्तविक कुरा थाहा पाउँछन्, वाइ सी मर्डर हर हस्बेन्ड, त्यो कुरा पनि उनीहरूले थाहा पाउँछन्. Then about the glossaries, abashed, embarrassed or ashamed, canary, a small yellow bird is corner, a public employee is fastidiously in a manner not meant to be taken seriously, homestead, as provided by the Federal Homestead Act, Betty live in an area of public land granted a split fold course, a square stranger quilt joined together, resentfully, angrily, scoffingly, scornfully. Sheriff in the US, elected officers in a country who is responsible for keeping a peace, tippet, a shawl, or the scarf. Then about the summary of the play. Susan's Glaspell's play Trifle is one play about the story of a murder mystery of John Wright. John Wright को murder को कुरा गर्छ, a farm owner, an egoist man and his wife Minnie Wright. त्यसको बारेमा डिल गर्छ. The play opens with its five characters. फाइभवटा पात्र छन्. Enter into the kitchen of Wright farmhouse. The country attorney जसलाई वकिल भन्छौँ takes charge of the investigations, guiding the sheriff officers and Mr. Hale recounting their roles in the discovery of crime. They are followed by Mrs. Hale and Mrs. Peter. तिनीहरूको साथसाथमा Mrs. Hale र Mrs. Peter पनि इन्टर गर्छन्. Mr. Hale tells how he comes to the house to ask John Wright about the sharing of the cost of phone lines, only to find Mrs. Wright sitting in the rocking chair. She had an apron in her hand and was nervously pleating it. When he asked to speak with her husband, Mr. Wright says that he can't speak because Mr. Hale because he is dead upstairs with a rope around neck. मिसेस एलले सुरुमा मिस्टर एलले के भन्छ, कसरी ऊ यिनीहरूको घर आयो र कसरी मर्डरको बारेमा थाहा पायो भनेपछि ऊ आउँछ, टेलिफोनको लाइन जडान गर्न लागेको हुन्छ. दुईटैले मिलेर लाइन जडान गर्ने सोचेका हुन्छन्. त्यसको लागि आधा पैसा उसले तिर्छ कि भन्ने कुरा सोध्नको लागि आएको हुन्छ. अनि उसले के पाउँछ, हि फाउन्ड इज मिसेस राइट उसमा चेयरमा रकिङ चेयरमा बसेकी हुन्छन्, क्विल्ट बुनिरहेकी हुन्छन्. उसले सोध्छ द्याट हि वान्ट्स टु टक टु हर हस्बेन्ड. उनले के रिप्लाई गर्छिन्, हि कान्ट टक टु हिम बिकज हि इज डेड अप स्टेज. ऊ मरेको छ भनेर उसलाई डोरीले स्टेङ्गल्ड गरेर कसैले मारिदिएको छ. मिस्टर हेल ब्रिङ्स द सेरिफ हेनरी पेटर इन्भेस्टिगेसन. त्यसपछि इन्भेस्टिगेसन अफिसर्सहरूलाई उसले के गर्छ, बोलाएर ल्याउँछ. बोलाएर ल्याएपछि उसले सबै कुराहरू क्लियर गर्छ. यस इट इज बिकज मिस्टर राइट डजन्ट प्रिफर टेलिफोन एज पिपल च्याटर अलर्ट. तर वास्तवमा के हुन्छ, यहाँ अलिकति के हुन्छ, कन्फ्युजन के आउँछ भने वास्तवमा मिस्टर जो राइट हुन्छ, हि डजन्ट प्रिफर द कन्भर्सेसन्स. So it's a little bit ironical as well. Mr. George Henderson begins his investigations and finds the glass jar of fruit preservative broken because of the cold, which has made the cupboard messy. उनीहरूले प्रिजर्भेटिभ ग्लासहरूलाई पनि अथवा सामानहरू मसलाहरू अचारहरू राख्ने ग्लास पनि के हुन्छ, फुटेको पाउँछ चिसोले गर्दा. अनि उसले कपबोर्ड पनि मेसी फोहोर भएको पाउँछ. मिसेस पेटर इन्टरप्ट्स हिम सेइङ दैट मिसेस राइट इज worried. Mrs. Wright is worried about it. Mr. Hale says that the women worry about trifles. त्यसपछि उसले के भन्छन्, जब वाइफले मिसेस पेटरले के भन्छन्, मिसेस राइट यसको बारेमा चिन्तित छिन्, उसले के भन्छ, वुमेनहरू यस्तै ट्राइफल तुच्छ चिजहरूको बारेमा मात्र वरिड हुन्छन्. मिस्टर एन्डरसन क्रिटिसाइज मिस्टर राइट फर द डर्टी टवेल इन द किचन. त्यो किचन फोहोर हुन्छ अनि पान्जहरू फोहोर हुन्छन्, त्योको लागि उसले के गर्छ, क्रिटिसाइज गर्छ. मिसेस हेल रिग्रेट्स मिसेस राइट and feels sorry for not visiting her for more than a year, as she always busy in her farm with her farmer husband. Then the man goes to upstairs. त्यसपछि मान्छेहरू माथिल्लो तलामा जान्छन्. Women are left alone. Mr. Henderson allows Mrs. Hale and Mrs. Peters to gather few belonging for Mrs. Wright. उनीहरूले के भन्छन्, आफ्नो वाइफहरूलाई गएर केही सामानहरू मिसेस राइटको लागि ग्यादर गर. While gathering some household goods makes Mrs. Wright feel more easy at the jail. They discuss Minnie Wrights and her childhood को बारेमा पनि डिस्कस गर्छन्. मिनी राइट सुरुमा के हुन्छ, बिफोर 30 years when she was very happy and sang beautifully, her वरिज उनको लाइफ एकदमै एक्साइटेड थियो, एकदमै राम्रो थियो, त्यो कुरा उनीहरूले डिस्कस गर्छन्। मिसेस हेल मेन्सन दैट हर हस्बेन्ड फाउन्ड अ गन। मिसेस हेलले के भन्छन्, हर हस्बेन्डले घरमा एउटा गन पाएको छ। जब घरमा गन हुँदा हुँदै मान्छेले किन डोरीले मर्डर गर्यो होला भन्ने कुरा पनि उनले के गर्छिन् त उठाउँछिन्। द म्यान re-enter briefly, फेरि उनीहरू प्रवेश गर्छन्, then leave, they laugh, listening to the women's discussion about the blanket to be quilted or knotted, associate to its rifle। तिनीहरूले ब्ल्याङ्केट क्विट गर्ने कि अथवा सिल्ने कि नट गर्ने त्यो कुरा सुनेर पनि उनीहरू हाँस्छन्। मिसेज हेल observes some strange things in as half of the dishes, towel clean, loaf of bread outside and bread box unfinished quilt, त्यो क्विल्ट पनि नबिनेको, टवेल फोहोर पाउँछन्, खानेकुराहरू ब्रेडहरू राखिएको। यसले के देखाउँछ, सडनली समथिङ टुक प्लेस एन्ड द मर्डर वाज ह्यापेन्ड। मिसेस पेटर्स डिस्कभर्स मिसेस राइट्स बर्ड। त्यसपछि मिसेस पेटरले मिसेस राइटको बर्ड पनि पाउँछिन् एउटा कपबोर्डमा, त्यो चरा मरेको पाउँछिन्। बट नट अब सरी कपबोर्ड बर्ड केज पाउँछिन्, सरी यस बर्ड केज पाउँछिन् टुटेको, बर्ड राख्ने जो पिंजडा हुन्छ त्यसलाई टुटेको पाउँछिन्, बट नट अ बर्ड। रिमेम्बर्स अ क्यानरी सोल्ड बाई अ म्यान। त्यसपछि उनी सम्झन्छन् कसरी मिसेस राइटले एउटा क्यानरी बर्ड किनेकी हुन्छन्। सी थिङ्क्स द्याट इट मे बी द क्याट हेज गट बाई, बट मिसेस राइट हेज नो क्याट। उनले पहिला के सोच्छिन्, सायद बिरालोले यो चरालाई मारिदियो, तर उनको घरमा क्याट पनि हुँदैन। नो चान्स अफ इट। सी अल्सो रिमेम्बर्स हाउ पेटर्स क्याट unsettled her as it was entered her room. She remember how hard Mrs. Wright was and they had no children। उनीहरूको बच्चा पनि हुँदैन, उनीहरूको लाइफ एकदमै प्रब्लमेटिक हुन्छ। She preferred quiet in the house, he preferred quiet in the house, र उनको श्रीमान घरमा एकदमै शान्त राख्न चाहन्छ, केही नबोल्ने, हल्ला नहोस्। तर उनी के हुन्छन्, कन्भर्सेसन गर्नको लागि एउटा क्यानरी बर्ड किनेकी हुन्छन्। As he went out for work all the day, Mrs. Wright needed a good company। कम्पनीको लागि उनले एउटा क्यानरी बर्ड किनेकी हुन्छन्। Mrs. Hale finds the dead bird wrapped in a silk cloth in a pretty red box। त्यसपछि मिसेस हलले त्यो चरालाई पनि पाउँछिन्। चरा मरेको हुन्छ, एउटा सिल्क क्लथमा बेरेको हुन्छ, प्रिटी रेड बक्समा राखिएको हुन्छ, इन द स्विङ बास्केट हुज नेक इज रङ, जसको घाँटी बेरिएको हुन्छ, घाँटी तोडिएको हुन्छ। दे गट हरिफाइड। तिनीहरू हेरेर एकदमै डराउँछन्, तर्छन्छन्। मिसेज हेल हाइड्स द डेड बर्ड एज सी हियर्स म्यान कमिङ। तिनीहरूले चरालाई लुकाइहाल्छन् जब उनीहरूले मेनहरू आइरहेको सुन्छन्। एज द मेन गेट नथिङ इन द ब्यारन, दे अगेन गो टु अप स्टोर्स। फेरि माथिल्लो तलमा जान्छन् र रोपलाई एनालाइज गर्छन्, तिनीहरू त्यसको इन्च बाई इन्च एनालाइज गर्छन्। वन्स द म्यान ह्याभ लेफ्ट, जसरी म्यान्सहरू गइसकेका हुन्छन्, द वुमेन डिस्कस पास्ट पेन्स एन्ड लुजेस द प्यारोल द्याट द मिसेज राइट हेज सफर। त्यसपछि उनको विगतको घटनाहरू, मिसेज राइटको विगतको पास्टको घटनाहरूसँग उनीहरू डिस्कस गर्छन्, अनि उनीहरू नोस्टाल्जिक हुन्छन्। चाइल्डहुड डेजमा एउटा बोयले के गरेको हुन्छ, जब मिसेज राइट सानो हुन्छन्, एउटा केटाले उनको बिरालोलाई के गरिदिन्छ, बन्चरोले मारिदिन्छ, उनी एकदमै दुखी हुन्छन्। त्यस्तै यो त्यही मर्डरसँग सायद यो मर्डर पनि एसोसिएट भएको हो भन्ने तिनीहरू जोड्न खोज्छन्। एज ही हेटेड द बर्ड सिङ्गिङ। अब मिसेस राइटले के गर्यो, मिस्टर राइटले के गर्छ त, बर्डको सिङ्गिङ हेड गर्छ। सायद उसले मारेको हुनुपर्छ, यिनीहरूले गेस गर्छन्, सायद उसले चरा मारेको हुनुपर्छ। मिसेस पेटर रिभिल्स टप टाइम सी लुजेस 2 इयर्स बेबी। उनको 2 वर्षको बच्चा पनि के हुन्छ, रिभिल्स हर टप टाइम एज सी लुजेस 2 इयर्स बेबी। 2 इयर्सको बच्चा पनि मर्छ। दो द लेडिज बिकम नोस्टाल्जिक, दे थिङ्क द्याट मिसेस राइट इज टु बी पनिस्ड फर द क्राइम। तिनीहरू नोस्टाल्जिक भए तापनि तिनीहरूले के सोच्छन्, मिसेस राइटले क्राइम गरेकी छिन्, उनले अपराधको सजाय पाउनुपर्छ। मिसेस हेल सेज द्याट दे आल जस्ट लिभ इन द डिफ्रेन्ट काइन्ड्स अफ सेम थिङ। हामी पनि त्यस्तै लाइफ बिताइरहेका छौँ, हामी पनि मेल डोमिनेसनमा छौँ। मेन कम डाउन स्टेज एन्ड लुक नट सेटिस्फाइड एज दे डु नट गेट एनी क्ल्यू टु प्रोसिड द केस। तिनीहरूले कुनै पनि क्ल्यू नपाएपछि तिनीहरू दुखी अलिकति देखिन्छन्, असन्तुष्ट देखिन्छन्। द इन्भेस्टिगेसन इन्ड्स। द शेरिफ आस्क्स द अटर्नी इफ ही निड्स टु इन्स्पेक्ट द थिङ्स द वुमेन आर टेकिङ टु मिसेज राइट्स इन जेल। तिनीहरूले के त्यतिखेर सेल्फले के भन्छ कि हामीले यिनीहरूले वुमेनहरूले पनि जो सामान मिसेज राइटको लागि ल्याइरहेछन् त्यो पनि इन्भेस्टिगेसन गर्नुपर्छ। द कन्ट्री एटर्नरी डिसमिसेस दिस लुकिङली। कन्ट्री एटर्नरीले के भन्छ, होइन यिनीहरू के छन् त, दे आर ओन्ली लुकिङ फर द ट्राइबल्स। यस ट्राइफल्स थिङ्सहरूसँग तुच्छ चिजहरू हेरिरहेका छन्, यो हामीलाई पर्दैन। मिसेस पेटर ट्राई टु हाइड द बक्स कन्टेनिङ द डेड बर्ड इन द ब्याग अफ क्विल्ट पिसेस। त्यसपछि उनी लुकाउँछिन् जब यिनीहरू बाहिर जान्छन्। हेल hides the box in her coat pocket when the man re-enters and the women have one last chance to share this clue with them. Last chance हुन्छ तर उनीहरूले इनको जोकिङली जोक गरेको कारणले गर्दा they do not end the play closes with the saying to questions Mrs. Hales to question up Mr. Henderson. We call it not गाँठो पार्ने or not quilt it मिस्टर हेन्डरसन. यसरी यो के हुन्छ त प्ले अन्त्य हुन्छ. यसलाई हामीले के भन्यौं त नट गाँठो बनायौं, गाँठो बनाएर उ भएको हो, यसलाई क्विल्ट अथवा सिलिएको होइन, अरूले उ गरेको होइन भनेर तिनीहरूले डिल गर्छन्. यसरी हामीले सिम्बोलिजमको कुरा गर्छौं. सिम्बोलिजम इन द प्ले ट्राइफल्स यो इम्पोर्टेन्ट पनि छ. सिम्बल भनेको के सिम्बलहरू युज गरिएको छ त त्यहाँ हामीले रकिङ चेयर पाउँछौं, डोरी पाउँछौं, रोप पाउँछौं, प्रिजर्भर्स पाउँछौं, क्विल्ट पाउँछौं, अनि केज हुन्छ र क्यानरी बर्ड हुन्छ. यिनीहरूलाई के गरिएको छ प्लेमा सिम्बोलिजमको रूपमा युज गरिएको छ. सो वी क्यान से दैट सिम्बोलिजम इन द प्ले ट्राइफल्स. Trifles by Susan Glaspell portrays a gloomy, dark, and lonely setting where the Glaspell uses symbolic objects such as canary birds, quilt, bird cage, a rocking chair, the jar of preservers, rope, quilt, bird, and the bird itself to help the audience to get the better understanding for the characters. Here, this is birds and the bird cage has been repeated. So the first one, rocking chair. Rocking chair represents Mr. Right's nervousness and impatience. सुरुमा उनी चेयरमा बसेर यसरी हल्लिरहेकी हुन्छन्, त्यसले के देखाउँछ nervousness and impatience. Rope, it shows her revenge and rebellion. Revenge भनेको बदला, rebellion भनेको विद्रोह against her husband. It also says death and destruction because by the help of the rope is Mr. Right is killed. jar of preservers भनेको यो सामानहरू, थिङ्सहरू इज जुन के गरिएको हुन्छ राखिएको हुन्छ. यो एउटा यसलाई फिमेल आइडेन्टिटीसँग एसोसिएट गरिएको छ. फोर्थ वान क्विल्ट. क्विल्ट भनेको मेन्टल. क्विल्ट रिप्रेजेन्ट्स मेन्टल स्टेबिलिटी. सिन्स सी वाज अलवेज होम अलोन सी स्पेन्ड मोस्ट अफ अर टाइम मेकिङ क्विल्ट्स. त्यो ब्ल्याङ्केटहरू बुन्ने काम पनि उनी गरिरहेकी हुन्छन्. बर्ड केज. बर्ड केज रिप्रेजेन्ट्स हाउ Mrs. Wright was trapped in the marriage. बर्ड केजले के देखाउँछ मिसेस राइटको फ्रिडम एकदमै ट्र्याप्ड गरिएको छ, स्वतन्त्रताहरू त्यो देखाउँछ. बर्डले के देखाउँछ बर्ड सेज द स्याड एन्ड इभन इज लोनली लाइफ. बर्डले के देखाउँछ बर्ड इज नट कम्प्लिटली फ्री एट इट इज यो एकदमै सप्रेस्ड अथवा टिमिड भन्छ यस, काइन्ड, प्रिटी, स्वीट यो सबै कुराहरू के गर्छ त रिप्रेजेन्ट गर्छ. जसरी मिसेस राइट छिन् त्यस्तै यो बर्डको लाइफ पनि हुन्छ यस. Thus, Glaspell uses these symbols in the play Trifles to probe dual meanings to the audiences. Then about the understanding the text. Answer the following questions. Question A. Do you believe that Mrs. Wright killed her husband? Yes, I believe that Mrs. Wright killed her husband because her husband, Mr. Wright, might have killed her canary, her only companion, and made her life isolated, which resulted her to revolt against her husband's male domination, and consequently she killed her by hanging. The motive for crime lies in the many sad and isolated life by her husband. Main उद्देश्य यो हुन्छ. Do you think Mrs. Wright's death would have been uncovered if Mrs. Hale hadn't stopped by the Wright's home? यदि मिस्टर हेल राइटको होम नजिक नझुकेको भए यसको जो मर्डर छ यो धेरै लामो समयपछि के हुन्थ्यो त कभर्ड अथवा अनकभर्ड नै रहिरहन्थ्यो. डेथ वुड ह्याभ बिन यो अनकभर्ड हुन्थ्यो कि हुन्थेन भन्ने कुरा भन्छ. यदि यो के गरेको भए मर्डर इफ इज मिस्टर हेल ह्याडन्ट स्टप्ड बाई द राइट्स होम द मर्डर may not be uncovered अथवा sorry may not do you think Mr. Wright's death would have been uncovered कि उसको डेथ अनकभर हुन्थ्यो यदि यो न स्टप भएको भए स्टप नभएको भए सायद यो अनकभर्ड हुने थिएन. इट वुडन्ट ह्याभ बीन अनकभर्ड इज आर इट मे बी अनकभर्ड आफ्टर 2 or 3 months 2-3 महिना पछि पनि हुन सक्थ्यो र यो रोकिन पनि सक्थ्यो. इन ट्राइफल्स इट इज पोसिबल दैट इफ मिस्टर हेल hasn't stopped by the farmhouse, the death of Mrs. Wright would not have been uncovered for a long time. पछि हुन सक्थ्यो जब मान्छेहरू त्यहाँ के हुन्थे प्रेजेन्ट हुन्थे. If Mr. Hell hadn't stopped by the farmhouse, we assume that we would have had no interest in studying a party line telephone with Mrs. Wright. If this is true, then Hale would have had no reason to visit the farmhouse. Mrs. Hale confesses that she had stopped visiting Mrs. Wright, so it is possible nobody would have come by the farmhouse, and it is possible that the murder would still eventually have been discovered. But it might have taken months. लामो समय लाग्न सक्थ्यो सायद मर्डर रिभिल भए तापनि. Question C. Why does Mrs. Hale think that Mrs. Wright's worries about her preservers indicate her innocence? किन मिसेज हेलले सोच्छिन् मिसेज राइट्सको वरिज अबाउट हर प्रिजर्भर्स इन्डिकेट्स हर इनोसेन्स? किन अथवा उनले सोच्छिन् कि मिसेज राइट्सको वरिजहरू के छ उनको इनोसेन्सलाई रिप्रेजेन्ट गर्छ? As Mrs. Wright tries to feel at home through her different things, even if she is trapped in jail accused of a mayor's crime, Mrs. Hale thinks that Mrs. Wright's worries about the preservers indicates her innocence. She contrasts Mrs. Hale, saying that only an innocent woman would ask for an apron shawl while worrying about the fruit. The shawl, apron, and fruit are the symbol that Mrs. Peters and Mrs. Hale would be familiar with, and therefore they would sincerely appreciate the horror that lead Mrs. Wright to commit this ultimate act of desperation. How does Mrs. Peters' homesteading experience connect her to Mrs. Wright? Mrs. Peters को homesteading experience ले कसरी Mrs. Wright सँग connect गर्छ? Mrs. Peter is the sheriff's wife. Sheriff's को wife हुन् and she is married to law. उनले कानुनसँग बिहे गरेकी हुन्छन् किन त उनको श्रीमान कानुनी वकिल हुन्छ. But she is rather a timid woman who is afraid to express her opinion. उनले आफ्नो opinion express गर्न सक्दिनन् आफ्नो husbandको जस्टिफिकेसन्समा. एटोर्नी जोक्सले पनि देखाउँछ. Thus she comes to same conclusion as Mrs. Wright and ultimately acting on her behalf to defend her even if she sees her as a victim as well as remembering her own marriage and life. Question number C. How do women's perspective on man differ? Women को perspective र man को perspective कसरी फरक छ? यो male dominated society हुन्छ, man अथवा patriarchal society हुन्छ. मेलले women'sलाई के गरेको हुन्छन्? Trifles consider गर्छन्, not valuable as they are just engaged with the minor things. So here the opinion of male and females varies. Yes. Tribal two sorts of perspective are found while examining the murder trial of the Mrs. Wright, Mr. Wright. Women's attitude on man differ in the sense male and females hold a relatively stereotypical views of their own communication behavior. Males perceived themselves as more controlling and detached, while females saw themselves as more nurturing, सेवा गर्ने, more dependent. In an opposite sex relationship, however, the discriminating communication behaviors for male and females were nurturance and dependency. For instance, the attorney associate Mrs. Peters as a woman's married to law, which women's identities depended on men. Therefore, females shows their radical or feminist perspective in the play to save Mrs. Right at the end. त्यसकारण फिमेलहरूले फिमेललाई लास्टमा बचाउन खोजेका छन् to some extent. Then about reference to the context. Read the extract from the play given below and answer the questions follow. Mrs. Peter, glancing around, seemed funny to think of a bird here, but she must have had once, or why would she have a cage? केज छ भने बर्ड पनि हुनुपर्छ. आई वन्डर व्हाट ह्यापन टु इट? के भयो होला मिसेज हेल? आई सपोज मेबी द क्याट गट इट. सायद बिरालोले मारिदियो कि भनेर मिसेज हेलले रिप्लाई गर्छिन्. Who is she refer to? She refers to Mrs. Wright. What does the word one stand for? यो माथि one भनेको के स्ट्यान्ड गर्छ? One stand to canary or birds. What is the full form of SPOSE? Suppose. It is the full form of suppose. What do you mean when Mrs. L says the cat got it? भनेको क्याटले सायद मारेको हुनुपर्छ क्यानरी बर्डलाई. Question B. Mrs. L Wright was clothes. She used to wear pretty clothes below Lively when she was Minnie Foster's one of the town's girls singing in the choir. But that was 30 years ago. 30 years ago उनी एकदमै ब्युटिफुल छिन्, गीतहरू गाउने गर्थिन्, उनी मञ्चहरूमाथि गीतहरू गाउने गर्थिन्, ग्रुपमा उनी सिङ्गिङ गर्ने गर्थिन्. Why does Mrs. Hale refers to Mrs. Wright as Minnie Foster? Mrs. Hale Mrs. Wright लाई Minnie Foster किन भन्छ? किन त उनी सानी थिइन्? Indicate her young pretty, beautiful, unmarried and free girl. पहिला उनी young, pretty, beautiful, unmarried, free girl भएको कारणले गर्दा she is referred as Minnie Foster. What does her description tell you about Mrs. Wright? Mrs. Wright को बारेमा उनको डिस्क्रिप्सन ले के देखाउँछ? Description says tells that Mrs. Wright was a very charming girl who wore pretty clothes and sang beautifully at the time. What does Mrs. Hale mean by that was 30 years ago? भनेको 30 years ago भनेको that was long time ago when she was young. She was beautiful, popular and completely free. But now the case is completely different. Then about the question number C, what is the main theme of the play? We have already discussed about it. Question D, discuss the symbolism used in the play. I have already mentioned. You can see previously. Yes. Discuss the setting of the play. Setting also we have completed. So you can see in the same videos. Yes, we have already discussed about these questions which are mentioned in our textbooks. Reference beyond the text. The credibility of a character is determined not only by the character's thoughts and actions, but also by what other characters say and think about him or her. Discussed in relation to the characters of Trifles. अब क्रेडिबिलिटी भन्छ क्रेडिबिलिटी भनेको विश्वसनीयता मान्छेको विश्वसनीयता अथवा बिलिभेबल जो छ क्यारेक्टर्सको नट ओन्ली डिटरमाइन्ड बाई द क्यारेक्टर्स थट उसको विचार र थट एक्सनबाट गरिएको छैन उनीहरूले के सोच्छन् अबाउट हिम अर हर त्यसले पनि के गर्छ त अरू क्यारेक्टरले उनको बारेमा के सोच्छन् क्यारेक्टर्सको आफ्नै विचार अथवा विश्वसनीयता उसको क्रेडिबिलिटी अफ अ क्यारेक्टर इज नट एउटा क्यारेक्टरको विश्वसनीयता मान्छेको विचार र एक्सनबाट देखिन्न अरू मान्छेले त्यसको बारेमा के सोच्छन् त्यसबाट पनि थाहा पाउन सकिन्छ डिस्कस इन रिलेसन टु द क्यारेक्टर्स अफ ट्राइफल्स सुसन ग्लासपेल्स play trifles explore male female relationships and credibility of a character by other characters thought actions what other characters says and think about him or her on her. It also talks about stereotypes that women faced. यसले के गर्छ कसरी अरू क्यारेक्टर्सहरूले एउटाको बारेमा सोचेका हुन्छन् त्यो कुराहरू पनि यसले के गर्छ मेन्सन्स गर्छ यस The attorney, with the intention of proving that Mrs. Wright choked the husband's death. एटोर्नीले पहिला के प्रुभ गर्न खोजेको हुन्छ मिसेस राइटले आफ्नो हस्बेन्डलाई चोपेर मारेकी छिन् अथवा घाँटी खिचेर मारेकी छिन् वाज इन्टरभ्युइङ मिस्टर हेल अन वाट ही सा व्हेन ही केम टु दी हाउस घर आउने बेलामा के उसले देखेको हो वुमेन अन द अदर ह्यान्ड वेयर जस्ट देयर टु गेट सम क्लथिङ्स फर द वाइफ हु वाज इन the jail suspected murder of her husband. However, the clues with which would lead them to find the facts were with women's. However, the man laughs at the women's wondering. तर मेलहरूले उनीहरूतिर हाँसेका हुन्छन्. In fact, the man just easily believes a lie about this board and cage when the cage is noticed, it is broken, the door overlooked. The country attorney asks, "Has the bird flown?" Mrs. Peters replies, "Cat got it." सायद बिरालोले यसलाई मारिदियो भनेर त्यसरी रिप्लाई गरेको हुन्छन् सेभ गर्न खोजेकी हुन्छन्. In addition, the female character noticed not only the bird's cage and quilt but other things that the man called trifles like Minnie's frozen preserves, her request for her apron and shawl. At the end, the male characters, like the attorney, underestimates Mrs. Hale and Mrs. Peters, while they support and understand the plight of Mrs. Wright, even if they notice several proofs about her guilty. Question B. Dramatic irony occurs when the readers or audience has information that is unknown to the characters in the play. It creates tension and suspense. Analyze the play discussing the author's use of dramatic irony based on these questions. Paido, what information is crucial to the play Trifles? Crucial information in the play Trifle is that two female characters discovered a dead bird. A clue to a murder that remains unknown to others by the key characters. अरू मेल क्यारेक्टर्सले यसको बारेमा थाहा पाएको हुँदैनन्. How does the playwright use this information to create the dramatic irony? ड्रामेटिक आइरोनी क्रिएट गर्न कसरी यो प्ले राइटरले यसलाई युज गरेका छन् त प्ले राइटर युजेस दिस इन्फर्मेसन डिस्कभरिङ द डेड बर्ड्स एज ए क्लू फर द मर्डर that is unknown key characters at the dramatic irony in the play. Trifles. It builds as the women's. Mrs. Hale and Mrs. Peters find the clues like the dead canary and note that someone appears to have broken its neck. But the attorney jokingly says women like Mrs. Peters are married to law, and it created dramatic irony in the play. What effect does the dramatic irony have on the audience and the play? Dramatic irony ko effect audience mathi the play mathi kasari cha. Dramatic irony has great effect on the audience and the play. Country attorney George Anderson, Sheriff Harley Peters, and local farmer Levi Sale are blinded by their assumptions that women concern themselves with only trifling things and are not intelligent. In reality, it is they who trifle about the mini rights housekeeping while Mrs. Peters and Mrs. Hale solve the mystery of why mini right killed her husband. यिनीहरूले womenहरूले थाहा पाइसकेका हुन्छन्. As the final twist, the two women's in-depth identity of Mrs. Wright's abuse at the hands of her husband and feel the murder was justified. Then they then conspire to conceal the truth from their ignorant husbandबाट वास्तविक प्रुफ लुकाउँछन् तिनीहरू जकेटभित्र त्यो क्यानरी बर्डको बक्सलाई. दिस सिचुएसन रिप्रेजेन्ट्स ड्रामेटिक आइरोनी बिकज द अडियन्स नोज मोर देन द इन्भेस्टिगेटर्स. अडियन्सले यसको बारेमा बढी थाहा पाएका हुन्छन्. Then about the mini rights character analysis. Mini rights, the main female protagonist of the play Trifles. Mini Wright, also known as Mrs. Wright after marriage, is the female protagonist of the play Trifles. She is the wife of the murdered John Wright and his killer. Mrs. Hale remembers Minnie writes Minnie for her youthful. Yes, Mrs. Hale सम्झन्छन् Minnie youthful innocence, happiness before she was married. उनी married हुनुभन्दा अगाडि Minnie foster थिइन्. Back then she sang joyfully in the local choirs. त्यो स्टेजहरूमा गानाहरू गाउने गर्थिन्. But after marriage Minnie became timid. एकदम कमजोर हुन्छन्, sad हुन्छन्, isolated हुन्छन्. Minnie killed her husband, a vengeful man. एउटा vengeful रिसाहा मान्छेलाई by strangling him in retributions for his final cruelness of killing her pet bird. उसको पेट बर्डलाई उसले मारिदिएको हुन्छ, त्यसकारण उनी रिसाएर मार्छिन्. The only being that is provided happiness and company for her. एउटा चिज मात्र घरमा हुन्छ जसले उनलाई कम्पनी दिइरहेको हुन्छ. त्यसको बारेमा त्यसलाई उसले मारिदिएपछि उसले मार्छिन्. Perhaps the most telling characters analysis within the play is when Mrs. Hale compares Minnie to a bird. These three characteristics traces three phases of her life: outgoing, isolated, melancholy, and vengeful. So many things we find in the play regarding Minnie rights. So, guys, this is much about the play Trifles. If you find this video helpful and interesting, like the videos, share it, subscribe it, click on the bell icon to get notification from upcoming videos. If you need videos on any other topics, chapters, mention below in the comment sections. Thank you for watching this. Goodbye. Have a good day.